G'day, bird nerds. I'm Grant. I'm a bird nerd. This is the Bird Emergency, and today I'm joined by Ainsley Power Walters. And Ainsley is a student at Melbourne Uni at the moment, doing a master's, right, Ainsley?
Yes, doing maths and science.
Yep. And her special subject, just imagine we were in a quiz show, special subject, helmet and honeyeaters. So, Ainsley, welcome. Thanks for coming into the bird emergency world.
Thanks for having me.
Tell us how, let's start with a bit of process. Apparently the pandemic's over. So how did trying to do a master's project at the tail end of the pandemic affect you being able to get any of your work done? Let's start there.
Yeah, well, there was certainly a lot of challenges. I actually started the master's at the beginning of 2020, so it was right at the beginning. And so my whole master's project has been throughout it. But it actually, I probably wouldn't be doing my research on helmeted honeyeaters if it wasn't for the pandemic, because I was originally going to be studying black swans. And then it sort of changed into helmeted honeyeaters a little bit down the line because I had gone down the coast. And anyway, towards the second half of the project, though, I wasn't able to go out into the field to collect my data. So we did a little bit of data collection, but I was very lucky. There was someone on site out there who was able to collect my data for me. That was Nick. So yeah.
Can't let that go past. How did you swap from a project based on black swans to helmeted honeyeaters?
Well, it's a bit of a story in itself, but basically we had only really just started the project on swans. We had worked that out the year before. But yeah, when the pandemic came, all research with the universities was put on hold with the exception of like critical research to do with the pandemic and medicine. And so I basically hit the pause button on this degree and I went down the coast. My family had a house down there. So this was Southwest Victoria. And when I was down there, I started volunteering in a local wildlife shelter called Mosswood Wildlife. And I just became really interested in the release process of birds in particular, like the rehabilitation and release and how they go post-release. So I was really interested in the monitoring side of how they go once they've been released back into the wild. Are they going okay? And so I started reading up on it, like the literature, to see what was available in Australia in particular in relation to the Wildlife Caring Network. And there wasn't a lot of research in this field at all. And I was so fascinated by it that I went back to my supervisor role and I said, I think I'd really love to do something looking at post-monitoring of birds once they've been released into the wild. And so then he introduced me to Michael McGrath, who's Victoria, who I spoke to. We threw around some different ideas for a research project. And that's really how it happened. It was really good timing. Michael said they were planning the next release of the helmeted honeyeaters into a brand new reintroduction site. And I said, yeah, I really want to do something with this. And that's really how it came about.
So the helmeted honeyeater was whitefella discovered in 1866. I'm pretty sure there were some blackfellas who knew that it was hanging around. And it was sort of, no great attention was paid to it, but it lived along that fringe of Western Port Bay in Victoria, down towards Phillip Island, where Woolamai, down to that Cape Woolamai area, if anyone knows it, Grantville, the Bass Coast nowadays. And its stronghold back then seemed to be around the Cooey-Rup Swamp, which is the northeastern part, right? Yeah, northeastern part of Western Port. But then that was gradually drained, and that part of its range was subsumed for farming. There's not a lot of information about the bird until it was found at Woorayellik, near Yellingbo, at the eastern edge of the Dandenongs in 1933. So there's a long time where it was just cruising around. And in 1947, they already had discovered that there were only about 100 birds left. So we're not talking about a long time of management. But from 1947 until 1965 was the time that it took for people to recognise that they needed to do something to protect the birds. And then the Yellingbo State Fauna Reserve was established, and it was established specifically to be a helmeted Honeyeater. So there's the broad part of the history. A year later, 2 years later, they did another survey, and they had counted about 200 birds. And then in 1971, the helmeted Honeyeater was proclaimed the state fauna emblem in March 1971. Ainsley, how many are there now, do you estimate?
Well, the last census, which was done in March this year, I believe there was 168 individuals in the wild.
And they would, I mean, this is supposition from me, but without that friends group being established, the local residents and the Yellingbo Reserve being established, do you reckon that we'd even be talking about helmeted Honeyeaters now?
No. I mean, the Friends group have been incredibly important in the recovery of the species. I mean, there are a number of stakeholders involved in the recovery program of the helmeted Honeyeater. So the Friends of the helmeted Honeyeater, there's DELP, there's Zoos Victoria, Parks Victoria, and then the universities that have been doing research with the birds as well. So it's been an amazing group since the inception of the recovery program, which was in 1989.
So we might talk about the recovery effort in more detail after we set up what your project is designed to do. So, let's run us through what the aim is of your project and what's the methodology.
Well, the purpose of my project is to really understand how different individuals that have been released into the new site use supplementary food post-release. So supplementary food has been playing a really important role in the recovery of the species. In Yellingbo in 2012, 2013, they basically expanded the supplementary food program throughout Yellingbo. And at that point, in 2012, 2013, there was a very low number of birds in the wild. So I think it was like 60 individuals. It went from 60 in 2013 to 190 in 2016. So just in 3 years, there was a huge jump. There were some other things going on as well, but the supplementary food has definitely made a big difference. So they use supplementary food also at the new release site. So in 2021, there was a new release site, a new reintroduction site that was established beyond Yellingbo. So this is a little bit past Warburton. It's in the Yarra Ranges National Park. And this is really the first site away from Yellingbo in about 10 years. And so there's supplementary food around that new site. There are 14 feed stations, and it's really to help the birds in the transition from captivity to the wild. So it can be quite a big transition for them. Some of the birds have come from captive breeding, and some of the birds have come from the wild population at Yellingbo. And the supplementary food is also designed to encourage the wild birds to stay and establish at the new site because they're most likely to leave. So my research project is really designed to get a better understanding of how different individuals in that release group use the supplementary food post-release. So we're looking at, in particular, their visits to the feeders. So how often are different individuals coming to the feeders? How long are they staying there? Which feeders are they using? And then we're also looking at behavioral interactions of the birds at the feed stations and what kind of factors may influence the outcomes of those behavioral interactions, because some birds are a lot more dominant than others. And so we want to see, why are some birds maybe using them more than others? Is it because they're from captivity? Is it because they're male or they're female? So it's really to help us paint a picture of how dependent they are on the feeders as well, I suppose, and to help assist in future management of the birds when it comes to reducing supplementary food.
So I think there's two questions that need to be answered from that. What is being fed and what does a feed station look like? Is it a tray or is it bottle feed with nectar? Tell us exactly what the birds are being fed and how it's distributed.
Okay, so the food is basically a commercial nectar mix, which they mix with water and they put out in little bowls. And every time they put out new food for the bowls, it's always in a clean bowl. So a lot of work goes into cleaning the feeders as well to make sure it minimizes the risk of disease. And the feeders themselves, if you imagine, I just sort of imagine one of these really big post boxes. It's basically, I don't know how high, maybe 5 feet. And it's this caged house. And the gaps between the bars are basically big enough for the birds to fit through, the helmeted honeyeaters to fit through, but it's protecting them also from predators while they're at the feed station. So it's this little safe space for them to be at.
Okay. And at a feed site, is there just one feeder, or is there an area designated, let's say maybe as big as a footy oval, a cricket ground, with a number of feed stations within it?
No, there's just sort of one station per area. So they spread them out throughout the reintroduction site, because what tends to happen and what's happened at Yellingbo is that birds can make their territories around the feeders. So I think at Yellingbo, I was told that it's like a breeding pair will make one feeder their territory. And so that was another interesting thing, like looking at the videos of the birds over the last year, is that sometimes, some birds have decided to make certain feeders their territories, and they don't, like other birds, or like some birds they allow there, some birds they don't. They're very funny.
So what were the geographical parameters of your research project? Like, how many sites were you concerned with compared to how many sites are there overall, supplementary feeding sites?
So what I'm concerned with is just the feeders at the new reintroduction site. So there's 14 feeders that are spaced across the whole site. I actually don't know how big the site is in total, but we did a bit of research also at Yellingbo prior to this release on a couple of the feed stations there. There are many more at Yellingbo, I believe. Yeah.
So how far is your site from Yellingbo as the crow flies?
I don't know what that means, but my site
in a straight line.
Okay. Well, it's about 50 k's, I think, from Yellingbo. So it's an hour and a bit to drive. It's a good distance, and it's amazing because I think one of the wild birds that was released at the new site actually found its way back to Yellingbo.
Okay.
It wanted to go home. So.
Yeah. Well, that raises some other questions too, doesn't it? But let's stick with your site at the moment. How is the monitoring done? Obviously, you're not there all the time, and obviously the zoo's Vic staff and the Department of Environment, Water, Land and Cutting Up Trees Department aren't there the whole time. So how is the monitoring of each feed station done?
Yeah, so basically we use GoPro cameras. I know that Zoos Victoria and Delft also use the camera traps as well. But for my project in particular, we decided on GoPros because they were just really good at focusing in on the bird's leg bands. So it was really important that I was able to see the colored leg bands on the birds, and I was able to zoom in close enough so I can identify them. So we used GoPros. We had a few GoPros, like 3 or 4 at a time, recording at the feed stations. And yeah, we would record for the life of the battery. So we weren't using external batteries. But yeah, so we would capture footage of the birds after they've been fed. And then, that went on basically for about 5 months. So from the release in August 2021 through to December, we were filming them every week. And I have to say, that wasn't me. That was actually my colleague, Nick, who is with Zoos Victoria. He very kindly collected all the footage for me because it was during the time of the very strict lockdown in Victoria. So I wasn't able to go out to the site and most of the time. Very thankful.
So were the GoPros sighted inside the feeder structure, inside the box, or were they mounted at a distance away and showing the birds coming in and out?
Exactly. They were mounted on, I think, like maybe 1.5 meters or so back from the feeders so that I could see. So the feeders are basically, I described them before, like the caged little house. And then they also have 2 perches coming out from each side. And often that's where the birds would first come when they arrive at the feeder. And so that was the perfect place for me to be able to zoom in. The light was good there, so I would zoom in and be able to see their leg bands. So we would make sure that was all in that camera view.
How long does a GoPro battery last? Like, I'm guessing each time someone takes a data card and puts another one in, they're also swapping out a battery. So how long does that last? Because they're not movement activated, right? You just go there, you swap out the card, you press go, and it's recording. So how long would that recording session last?
About 1.5 hours. So per session. So when you do that a few times a week over 5 months, that was like heaps of data. In the end, we had plenty of data, and we have certainly enough, I should say, to be able to answer what we want to look at. And yeah.
So you had to trawl through all of that data yourself?
I did. So it took me a long time, but it was so fascinating because they're such incredible birds. They have this amazing behavior repertoire, which you really just get this amazing insight into their lives. And one of the things that I love is that they all look exactly the same. It was hard for me to tell them apart other than their leg bands. Impossible. But they all recognize each other in an instant. They know who is who. They know who their friends are. They know who their intruders are. So yeah, they're just incredible birds.
All right. So tell us what you learned, not so much about in the parameters of the project, but what did you learn about the birds? What are they like?
So one of the big takeaways for me so far, just from going through the footage, is that there's so much individuals, like they're unique individuals themselves. Like you have the species, we have 2 groups of birds. We have the birds from captivity. We have the birds from the wild, like that have come from Yellingbo. But they really are so unique. And one of the loveliest things has been watching all of their behaviors. So they're very territorial birds, and they have quite an interesting behavior repertoire, which includes a lot of territorial behaviors, which come across as quite, I suppose, aggressive. But they also have some really lovely behaviors. One of those is called a corroboree. And basically what it is, when they see their friends at the feed station, they quiver their wings, they tilt their head back, and they make this really lovely vocalization. And it's basically like a greeting. Like that's what they do when they see their friends at the feed station. So it's been really lovely to watch them. And
do they have a corresponding display for their enemies, or is it just basically chasing them out?
Nice. Yeah, that's it. That's one of them. They have a number of different defense behaviors or territorial behaviors, which it's sort of a scale. Like sometimes they use like maybe a light peck, and basically the birds will move to different parts of the feed station, and sometimes it's much more aggressive. So sometimes it is fully like, sometimes they drive them out and chase them out, but sometimes they do tolerate them there, but they don't like them being around the food too much. So one of the things that we're looking at in the research project is the outcomes of those behavioral interactions. So I've been sort of scoring what happens with bird A is sitting at the feeder, bird B comes in and replaces it or tries to drive it away. What is the outcome of that behavior? Is bird A leaving, or is bird A staying at the feeder and just moving to a different spot?
So you said that they're almost impossible to tell apart. So that tells me there's not any sexual dimorphism, that males look like females. They're an equivalent size as well.
Yeah.
But do males and females act differently?
Well, that's one of the things that we're interested in looking at. That's one of the factors that we're sort of going to be looking at in the results. Is they're using the feeders differently. If males are more dominant than the females. So far from what I've seen, it tends to be the males that are, I guess, more dominant birds. But yeah, it's a bit hard to know at this stage. We're still looking at our results, but yeah.
And I mean, feed stations are going to be like gold in a bushland environment for all of the nectar feeding birds. So are the helmeted honeyeaters, which for anyone who's not aware, because I didn't point it out at the start of the episode, helmeted honeyeater is a subspecies now of the yellow tufted honeyeater. So, but I would imagine that there are other honeyeaters living in the same area, perhaps some larger ones like the little wattlebird or the red wattlebird. So who's the king of the castle around these feed stations?
Well, actually, yeah. So I think at Yellingbo, they have seen some other species of birds at the feed stations. I think they've seen like rosellas like poking their head through the bars to try and get the food. At the new site, I actually didn't see any other birds in the feed stations at all. Sometimes there were birds that would they would stop by, like they would stand on the top of the feeder and then keep going. But yeah, like I didn't see any myself. I mean, I'm sure they're out there, but they've designed the feeders so that it does prevent larger species of birds from coming into the feeder. But yeah, sometimes apparently Yellingbo, the rosellas can poke their heads in, I've heard.
And there's no birds like silver eyes or anything hanging around? And are there seasonal, I mean, have you noticed, are there seasonal visitors coming through as well, because the helmeted honeyeaters are residents, aren't they? They're not usually, I mean, I don't think it's ever been described that they've been a sort of nomadic or semi-migratory species, have they?
Yeah, no, the helmeted honeyeaters are sedentary birds, so they tend to stick around at the same spot. In terms of other birds that are passing through, like seasonal, it's possible they probably are. I just haven't really seen any from the data, but Nick, who is out there every day, well, most days I think on site, like he's in the field, so he'd be able to get a better view of sort of what's happening around the feeders.
So how big approximately do you know is a territory of a pair? Actually, I'm making an assumption. Do they pair up or are they cooperative breeders?
They do pair up. Yeah. So they do pair up and they usually have 2 offspring. Excuse me. And from the last breeding season of the new site, I think there was one fledgling that came out of that first breeding season. So this breeding season is really one to watch. I think they're hoping to see more this time, so we'll have to see. In terms of the area, they do space the feeders a certain distance apart. I'm off the top of my head, I can't remember what that is, but it's big enough so that the territories don't overlap.
And you mentioned that some of the previously released birds have found their way back to Yellingbo. Are you aware of any of the birds from the wild population have colonised the new site?
So the wild birds, prior to the release in 2021, the wild birds have mainly just been at Yellingbo. And as far as they're aware, they haven't really extended past Yellingbo. They tend just to stick around that area. And with the new group that was released in 2021, they did do a release this year as well. But the one that I was working on last year, so it was 2 groups. The captive birds, as far as I'm aware, have all stayed at that site. But some of the birds, I am told, have left. And yeah, one of those individuals, I think at least one, found its way back to Yellingbo. So not sure what happens to the other ones, but they do. I know my supervisor had put radio tracking devices on all of the individuals that had been released. So I think they're in the process of looking at what their movements are around the site and where they go.
So there'd been an effort to establish a population at Bunyip State Park. Let me just see when that...
Yeah, so that was 2000.
So if you're looking on the map near Tonnumbuck, Bunyip State Park. Now, that population was wiped out, wasn't it, with the 2004 fires?
So what happened there, I think it was those releases that were happening from 2001 in Bunyip State Park. It was during the time of the Millennium Drought. So I think the last census there, they had only recorded a few birds, and as far as anyone is aware, there's no more at Bunyip State Park. So, yeah, drought itself had quite a negative impact on the quality of the habitat. And in 2012, I think they decided to scroll back their supplementary food by about 25%. So the birds there were also being supported by supplementary food, but when they rolled it back, that's when the population declined, and they learned from that release that the habitat there wasn't actually strong enough or resilient enough to support the growing population of helmeted honeyeater without the support of supplementary food. So that was a really interesting point as well around supplementary food in terms of future management. How and when do you start to roll it back so that the birds aren't actually affected? The population isn't affected, but they're also able to become a self-sustaining population. And that's really the ultimate goal.
Yeah, because after Tonnumbuck, they then went in 2010 to a third site at Gembrook. And the results there were quite encouraging too. But then the drought meant that the creeks dried up. And what we need to sort of point out is that the habitat that the helmeted honeyeater prefers is reliant on a sort of mix of paperbark and eucalypt vegetation community that is reliant on the creeks. So that if the creeks dry up for an extended period, that alters that vegetation community, which then makes it less attractive to the birds, and they move on. They either move on or they die. I think
absolutely.
I think that's the fair inference. So
yeah.
Do you think that, I mean, now that those parks exist, there was a consolidation of the public land that is suitable habitat for helmeted honeyeaters to be consolidated under sort of one management body. So do you think there is a possibility that if the numbers can be built up through a mix of captive breeding, and I want to ask you a bit more about that in a minute, and the wild populations that are now hanging on, do you think there's a possibility in the near or medium future to try and revisit some of those earlier sites, or have they been changed to an extent that they're probably not able to be considered?
It's a really good point. So the earlier sites, you mean revisit the one you
and like Gembrook and
I think they have a plan to reestablish multiple populations of the bird within their former range. So I don't know exactly where all those sites are, where they're thinking about doing that. But yeah, certainly that's the bigger plan. And hopefully, all going well, they continue to make a good recovery.
Because, of course, the danger of fire never goes away. So having only one or two isolated and non-contiguous populations places them at risk of any fire event. And then, of course, we've got drought on top of that.
Absolutely.
And now I guess we have to think about the severity of the storms that we get in those localities now you only need 2 or 3 large trees to fall to substantially alter the habitat if they're large enough. So
that's something I was thinking about recently, actually, just thinking about the Bunyam State Park introduction and the drought, and knowing one of the keys was knowing the resilience of the site that you're going to be releasing the animals into, whether birds or whatever animal you're reintroducing. And I imagine that's sort of difficult to know to an extent with climate change and with all these extreme weather events that we're having. That, yeah, it's definitely something that it's a challenge. And luckily, helmeted honeyeaters, we can support them with supplementary food, and it does seem to be really helping them.
What are the key vegetation species that have to be present or is there a particular vegetation community that needs to be present for the helmeted honeyeater to be successful?
Yeah, so they prefer swamp forests that are dominated by managum. So I think also managum, swamp gum, and they need really good mid-story habitat as well for their breeding, so like tea tree. And yeah, they're nectarivores, so they feed on nectar, but also like lerps and manna, and during the warmer months, they do feed on insects as well.
Are they good at catching insects on the wing?
What's that, sorry?
Are they good at catching insects on the wing? I don't know how much of a bird nerd you are, but I love watching the wattlebirds when they're catching insects on the wing. They're amazing in the air.
Yeah, I know. I take my dogs actually to the yelling bow and I see the swallows flying around catching them. It's that's incredible. So I don't know with the helmeted honeyeaters if they do it flying, but yeah.
So are you a certified bird nerd now?
I think so. How do you get certified? I'm not really sure.
Well, maybe you just get certifiable, but
yeah, I mean, I love them. I love birds and I love watching them and listening to them in particular. So yeah, I'm definitely a lover for sure.
Oh, well, one way to find out is I can ask you, what's your favourite bird book? Like, what do you take with you when you're out looking at birds?
Bird book. I don't actually have one. That's not true.
Well, there we go.
Maybe I'm not a bird nerd.
Not yet. Not yet.
I thought you were going to say, what's your favourite bird? I'm like, okay, I can get to that one. But yeah, bird book, I don't know. But speaking of bird books, oh, sorry, you go.
Well, you can answer that. What is your favourite bird?
Oh, God. I don't know if I have a favourite bird. But, well, my mom's favourite bird was actually the yellow-tailed black cockatoo. And so that has sort of always been a really special bird for me. I actually saw a whole flock of them this morning. I hardly ever see them because I live in the city, Melbourne, and it was really special to see them this morning for sure.
So you saw the flock that moved through and visit Royal Park every now and then, did you?
Yeah, so they were moving. Sometimes I do see them in Yarraband, but yeah, they were moving through.
Yeah, they move along the Yarra and along some of the creek systems. So, yeah, they're around. I thought you might have said black swan.
They're a beautiful bird as well. They're so beautiful and elegant. Yeah, we're lucky. We've got so many wonderful birds here.
No doubt. Let's get back to helmeted honeyeaters for a minute. I know you haven't tallied up all your results yet, and you're not ready to officially give results. So what's your gut feeling about what you have learned so far from your observations and analysing all those countless, you must have nearly 1,000 hours, I guess, of footage that you've trawled through?
Yeah, I definitely have an idea of which individuals in the release group are more dominant birds. There's one bird in particular who has been involved without a doubt, but without even telling but he's been involved in like the majority of the interactions, the behavioral interactions. He's a very territorial bird and he's basically claimed one of the feeders. But he has this clique, so he allows different individuals there and some not. But yeah, like in terms of the group itself, I think it's going to be, my initial feeling going into it was that the wild birds would be perhaps more dominant birds. But that dominant bird that I just spoke about, he is actually from captivity. He's from the captive breeding. So it is a bit tricky to know at this stage. And one of the wild birds that are there as well, he's very chilled out bird and he's stuck around. So it's been a real surprise to me, I think, some of the things that I've seen so far. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing how the individuals tally up, really, how they're all going. And I think another thing is some of the birds aren't accessing the food as much as the more dominant birds. And so the question then is, are they then getting wild food or are they going to other feeders to feed? Because if they're not accessing the food as much as the more dominant birds and they're still persisting in the population, well, that's a really good sign anyway.
Absolutely. I think I read that the longest lived bird recorded was about 16 years and that about 6 years is an average lifespan for the birds that have been studied since the 80s or 90s. So has there been much mixing in terms of the pair bonding between wild birds and captive bred birds? Like once there's a release, do they form two gangs or do they mix up and split out? And, what do you know so far? That
question that you did ask me, that's one of the questions I've been so fascinated by as well. And yeah, at this stage, I don't really know, but from looking at the videos so far, it seems that it's a real mix. Like sometimes there's this one clique of maybe 5 or 6 birds that tend to all stick together, but there does appear to be a hierarchy within that group. So there is that really dominant bird, and then there is the less dominant birds. And then there are also lone rangers. So there are birds that will only visit feeders on their own, or they will only come to the feeder once the more dominant birds have left. And then there are other birds I've seen also that work together in pairs to drive off intruders from the feeders. So it does appear so far like to be a real mix of groups and of pairs, but yeah, something still to figure out.
And is there any indication if they are forming sort of a loose family group, uncles, aunties, cousins hanging out together? Well, yeah, I just wonder. I mean, I was watching this morning, a group of magpies, and it looked like this morning was the morning where Mum and Dad magpie were actually ousting last year's offspring out of the territory. They've let them hang around and now they're throwing them out. It was pretty cool. So I wonder what the helmeted honeyeaters are doing. I mean, they pair off, but is there any cooperation with previous year's brood?
That's a good question. I'm actually not sure. I know from Yellingbo, Bruce, who's one of the scientists there, he's with DELP and he's been working on the program for a long time, and he knows all the individuals. He did say that there are like families that do exist around the feed stations, and yeah, with the new release group, though, most of the birds that were released were first year birds, and a mix of male and female birds. Although there were some older ones in that first release group as well that had come from captivity. So yeah, it's they're all sort of out there together. It's all very new, and hopefully they do start to pair up.
What can you tell us about the captive breeding program, Ainsley? Approximately how many birds are involved, and is there like a regular production line of how many offspring that they can expect each year? Have they got it down to such a fine art yet that they can sort of budget, for want of a better term, for some viable offspring to release each year?
Yeah, I think it does vary from year to year. From what I've heard from my supervisor, I actually really would have loved to go into the captive breeding program, or earlier on in my research, but just because of the lockdowns, I wasn't able to. But I think it does depend, like the releases that they do annually, which they've been doing annually since the 90s. It depends on how many, offspring that they have from that previous breeding season. And from what I've heard, it does vary. I'm not sure as to why it does vary, but yeah.
Well, I guess there's good years and bad years. And sometimes I imagine honeyeaters have the equivalent of not tonight, dear, I've got a headache. So, and I guess there's all those questions too about how long is the average vigorous breeding lifespan of a pair, and maybe that might be different for male and female birds. I guess there's so much that they're unlocking in that program. Wouldn't it be great? Wouldn't it be great to go there and check it out and do an interview on site? For sure. It would be. Yeah, I know. You've been and had a look at the breeding program though, haven't you?
I haven't actually technically been there. Technically. Kills really have, but not. I haven't been into to see the birds that are in the captive breeding, but we would have liked to do some filming in there, like prior to the release of the birds, just to get an idea of the individuals and those behavior changes over time. I think that was something that we were quite keen to do, to see how their behavior or how their use of food changes over time. So that's another thing that we're keen to look at. And but who knows, next time perhaps I might continue on studying hominid honeyeaters post the grade.
Well, that was going to be my next question. I'm assuming that you will be finishing up the master's project this year, at the end of this year. Is that right?
It's going to be middle of next year, actually.
Middle of next year.
Yeah.
Okay, so
yeah.
And so have you been thinking about extending the study into maybe a PhD project?
Yeah. I would really love to do that next year. I'm not sure whether I'll continue with the same species or maybe look at something else. I'm not sure yet. But that's definitely on the radar and something to think about for sure.
Now, if you don't pursue it, I mean, I'm not asking you to make life decisions here on Ainsley, but if you don't pursue it, is the project set up in a way that someone else could come in and pick it up and go on with it as well, supporting the work of Zoos Vic and the department?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So my research project will hopefully have a contribution to what they know and help in future management. And definitely, I'm sure there would be definitely opportunities to continue research with hominid honeyeaters and the recovery program.
So tell me what's the most surprising thing that you've learnt, not so much about the birds, but about the cooperation of the stakeholders, be it a couple of government bodies and then some volunteers and whatnot. So tell me what you've learned about that nexus and that network.
Well, I've met some people from DELP, so from the government department, and my supervisor, Michael, it's with Zoos Victoria. And it's been a dream come true, really. I mean, in terms of the cooperation, it's really amazing. Everyone that I've met, it has been so lovely. Some people have dedicated their entire lives and careers to the recovery program, to the bird. Bruce, who's with DELP, I don't know how many years, I think he told me, but he's been on it for many years, dedicated to all the individuals in the wild. And I think that's really been, I don't know if I'd say surprising, but it's certainly been so lovely to see it and to see the success that they've had because of that, the coming together of all the different stakeholders and groups and the community as well.
I'm glad you brought that point up, because part of the story I always try and tell, and I don't know if I do it well enough, but apart from the researchers who are gathering information and you're joining that group, is that a lot of people really they just, for the love or for the interest and the commitment to the survival of a species, they give up career options and whatnot to stay working with the species and to ensure continuity of care, for want of a better title, but that the reservoir of knowledge is continuous, so that the benefits of those people who are familiar with the species continue to be applied year after year after year. A lot of times working with a species requires you to forego some other career aspirations, because if you're working at a reserve, might only be budgeted for 2 positions that are only a medium way up the scale. So if you want to keep working with that bird, your career advancement stops. And that's the sacrifice that people make for conservation.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're right. And also just the emotional investment that they would have with the birds as well, and seeing the journey that they've been on since they started. You can imagine like people become just very dedicated to it, to the recovery, and wanting to go all the way and see them become a self-sustaining population so that, hopefully one day they will.
Conservation heroes, Ainsley. Conservation heroes in my...
They are, yeah.
Now, I wanted to draw attention to the hat that you're wearing. Tell us about that. Tell us about the hat.
So this hat is got a helmeted honeyeater on it, or hopefully you can see. And I got it from the Friends of the Helmeted Honeyeater website. They're from the online store. So yeah, I love it. I wear this every day. They've got lots of different products on there. Feel free to have a look on their website and check it out.
Now, it's a cool design, podcast listeners. It's like a Greg Chappell floppy cricket hat with a helmeted honeyeater on the front. It's a beauty. Now, helmetedhoneyeater.org.au is where you can go to get that. Now, just want to talk a little bit about the Friends group, and actually one particular aspect. They do have the shop, and you can get tote bags and all other kind of helmeted honeyeater merch. Let me get into the nursery. Just waiting for it to...
They also have a tab that if you feel like and you want to get involved, there's a Get Involved tab, and there's lots of different ways to get involved in the recovery program. So yeah, feel free to check it out on their website.
Yep. But if you live in that eastern part of Melbourne, or on the eastern fringes of Western Port, you can actually go to the plant nursery run by the Friends, and you can buy helmeted honeyeater friendly plants. So I wanted to make sure people knew that you can do that. And look, we might even do a Habitat Gardening with Grant episode more about those plants and maybe talk to someone from the nursery. But it's one of the ways that there can be a positive benefit for the community from the conservation work to protect a particular species. So the community can order or buy the plants, and if you're in that area, you can turn your street into potentially a helmeted honeyeater thoroughfare. To get from one patch to another. We have to think about how we can help them in a time where there might be more and more dangers from fires and whatnot. I know they're a long way apart, but wouldn't it be great if there were islands? There were these islands of suitable habitat that had been just cropping up in all the neighbours. 4 neighbours get together and plant enough plants to make it a good stop-off spot. So.
Oh, absolutely. Anyway. I feel like we're heading in a really good direction. I mean, obviously there are some still challenges along the way. And there are the state level, like native forest logging and things like that. But I really hope that overall it's heading in a good direction, and then we can have better environmental laws as well that can protect their habitat.
Oh yeah, I can't resist the urge to say, yes, better environmental laws. We have a state election in Victoria in November, so a vote for the helmeted honeyeater would probably mean that you don't be part of the cheer squad, but that you exert pressure with your vote strategically. So that's about as far as I'll push it with that one. Don't want to get anyone from the department or zoos in trouble. But yeah, there's a significant opportunity to exert some pressure to retain habitat at this next election. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, experience for sure.
So Ainsley, just want to extend that point that you kind of made then. With your interactions with the staff that are working with the honeyeater, you're optimistic, are you, that it's all trending in the right direction and that the population can perhaps increase and at the very least stay stable?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's heading in a really good direction. There is like I mentioned before, there's a bigger plan to create multiple reintroduction sites for the birds. So that hopefully eventually there will be within the helmeted honeyeaters form range, there'll be more reintroduction sites, and that will then protect them hopefully from being, if there were fires to come through, they'll be protected from that. And just overall, I think my gut feel is that there's a lot more awareness around conservation, and and the threats to biodiversity. Well, at the moment, I think it's heading in a good direction. That's my gut feel anyway. I mean, I've met so many wonderful people through this program so far that have, doing so many good things that, yeah, it's hard not to feel optimistic.
Well, that's really encouraging because so often I speak to people who are doing fantastic work, but the sense of echo grief just doesn't go away. So hopefully it is a positive story. So can we move away from helmeted honeyeaters for just a minute, even though this will be a bit helmeted honeyeater? Look at this, everybody. Can you see this? This is Ainsley's artwork. What are we seeing on screen, Ainsley? Describe it for the podcast listeners.
So this is one of my paintings of a helmeted honey. It's an oil painting on masonite. And yeah, I'm an artist as well. So I've actually been working as an artist for many years and continue to do so. And I love painting birds as well. So yeah, that's what we're seeing right now.
All right, well, tell us about your life as an artist. Where did that begin?
Yeah.
When did you realise that you were an art kid?
Well, I don't know if I ever realized it. It's something that I just kind of fell into, really. I'd done my science degree. And then at the end of the degree, I had an opportunity to illustrate some children's books. And I had done it myself, like through my degree, just as a hobby. It wasn't anything serious, but this opportunity came up to illustrate children's books, and it was really lovely. I was doing a lot of stories that were sort of set in old Melbourne, I suppose. And I was painting sort of a lot of heritage places and heritage buildings. And I just really developed this love of painting that subject matter. And so after, I did that for about 5 years. And then I decided to go off and do my own stuff and have exhibitions. And that's what I've been doing ever since. So, and then obviously back at uni as well. So it has been an interesting journey, but I've loved having the two things outlets, I suppose.
So the painting we looked at was an oil painting, but I have to ask, when did you get your 72 Derwent pencil set? How early in life was that?
Gosh, I did get one.
Of course you did. Didn't we all?
Yeah, I'm sure I did have one. When I was doing the illustrations for kids' books, I was using watercolor and gouache. Mainly gouache is beautiful water-based paint. And then I decided to move into oils. And they're all great paints. Yeah, so nowadays I mainly use oil. And
have you extended yourself any further, like doing lino cuts or working with charcoal, or are you pretty much sticking with paints?
Yeah, sometimes I try to go back to gouache just recently. I mean, charcoal, so sometimes I do feel like branching out. I haven't gone into lino, I have to say, but maybe ceramics. I think that would be something that I would love to do one day. Ceramics is really beautiful. But for now, I feel like the painting is probably, enough.
Well, I'm not going to stretch credibility any further and take my art interviewing any further than that. But I wonder if you thinking about sort of combining your interest in conservation and science with your art in the future.
Yeah, it's a really good question. It's something that I've thought about, and I think about ways to maybe do that, in particular around raising awareness. I think that that's such an important part of conservation and the work that we're doing. How can I use my art to raise awareness for the story of the helmeted honeyeater or for the habitat that they rely on? So yeah, I think that's something that it's a question that I ask myself quite a bit, and hopefully not too far away. I'd like to focus more on that.
I can't help myself with having a dig about awareness. I'm just looking at the Friends website and I can't see anything about a bake-off or anything there. So I'll just...
You know what I thought recently? Well, I said this to my supervisor maybe a year ago, is that, I don't know if you're into footy, I go for Richmond Football Club, I'm a big Tiger supporter. See, if you look at a picture of the helmeted honeyeater, they look like they're wearing the inverted Richmond jumper on their head. Like, it's the stripe. It would be a great opportunity to involve in the club, and maybe. So I actually tried to a little while ago, but it wasn't a good time for Richmond. So I might have to try again because I think it would be a great collaboration.
Let me just pull something up. Probably, I don't know if this will make it into the podcast, but for the live audience, and hello live audience, if you've got a question, feel free to put it. I've just got to find it's a fair way back, isn't it, from where I was talking about. Oh, gee, where is it? Oh, no, don't tell me. Don't tell me I can't find it. Or maybe it was in an email, not in my messages from something. All right, I'll tell the story. Yeah, it must have been, it can't be that far back. When we did the episode on the southern dotterel, the New Zealand dotterel, which is extremely critically endangered, down to the sort of 50 kind of number. I am just looking a little bit further. Can't find it. We were talking about it. It's from the deep south of the southern island of New Zealand. And the local rugby team is called the Stags, right? Now, that's a male deer, right? It's an invasive pest in New Zealand. So I just said, oh, wouldn't it be, why don't they adopt the southern dotterel? I mean, the idea that you're calling them the Stags seems a bit disingenuous. And anyway, one of the people who was listening sent me a message, which I'm trying to find to read out, but I can't. Oh, actually, here it is, I think. No, that's not the email. That was, sorry. But they said they contacted the people at the Stags and they had a meeting and they're contemplating dropping the Stags, or maybe they're going to have a dotterel round or something. I don't know. But they took their suggestion on, and maybe they'll be trying to use one of the regional teams, which is a national team, like the Queensland Bulls or the Victorian whatevers, the Bush Rangers in the cricket or whatever, and making it an endemic, indigenous, critically endangered species rather than invasive species, which has been borrowed from the legacy of the Scottish Highlands or something in New Zealand. So
that's it. I said they are actually thinking about changing it.
Apparently, they've had a meeting and they're talking about it. I don't know whether it's changing it or whatever, but that they took the meeting and took it on board that perhaps it was a little bit incongruous that they were aligning themselves with an invasive feral species rather than trumpeting a really special bird that is only found in their little neck of the woods. So, yeah.
Great idea. I mean, I feel like there is this movement towards more awareness and to these sort of things happening. I think the AFL actually in Australia, like we've brought in, I think it's like an environment round or a green round or something to raise awareness for it, for the environment in Australia. I think we did just recently do that. I have to double check that. But
yeah, I think sometimes, I think the AFL should perhaps concentrate on getting a few other things in line before they start trying to spread their wings. I mean, to me, that would be the ultimate bloody greenwashing, the AFL trying to talk about how they're great environmental citizens while they're flying up and down all over the country, chartering private jets to move pampered footy players around. No, I'm not going to wear that. I think it's nice that the sentiment is there, but I reckon it would be better if they all just said, from now on, we're only flying on normal consumer flights that everyone else can take rather than chartering special aircraft. But
yeah, I thought they did. Maybe, I didn't realize.
Nah, they still charter flights because no one wants to catch the red eye from Perth or to Perth or whatever. So yeah. Anyway, don't want to bag the AFL too much. Can't pies. So yeah, but yeah, I mean that's kind of often where they'll latch on to something big. I mean, I'm not having a real bash at footy here, but organisations will latch onto something which they think will make them look good without being really committed to it. And to me, that's just great.
Yeah.
If the commitment,
it needs to come from the heart. I totally get what you mean. I feel like, I don't know, would there be benefit for those sort of collaborations or relationships? I'm not sure.
Well, I think it's worthwhile exploring, but then you have to look at the history. When they get Indigenous relationships right within footy clubs, well, then I'll start giving a shit about the Indigenous jumpers. I'd rather they just stop effing over the Indigenous players at their club before they start going, look how much we care.
Yeah.
That's my point. But then I'm just a grumpy old man nowadays, Ainsley, so nothing makes me happy. Nothing makes me happy until all the numbers are going up, right? I'm not interested in trumpeting some program that continues to see a population decline year on year. That's not a success in my view, and neither is it if there isn't more habitat next year than there was last year.
Yeah.
If we haven't got more, we've got less. That's a failure.
Yeah.
So, yeah. But re-veg, actually, just quickly, how are the re-veg efforts going in the sites that you're familiar with? Are they ongoing, or are they special projects that need special funding once in a while?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not sure about how the restoration projects are going within Yellingbo, but I believe that they do happen. I'm just not sure. Yeah.
No, that's
sorry.
No, that was one I just sprung on you just thinking about it. I'll definitely try and speak to some people. Maybe you can hook me up, because no one from Zoos Victoria ever wants to talk to me. So
oh, really?
Yeah. I don't know why. Well, actually, I probably do know why. But
okay.
But we'll have to see if I can maybe speak to someone from the department, or certainly I'll reach out to the friends groups, because I think we should from time to time revisit the sort of recovery operations and see how they've changed, how they've adapted. And it's certainly Helmeted Honeyeater looks to me to be a success, because there were 50, right? And now there's a lot more than 50, and they're in a lot more than one or two places, which is good. And there is a viable population being maintained in captivity. So that's a lot better off than we were 30 years ago. So
yeah, absolutely. It's so wonderful to see the progress. And when things aren't going right, they're asking questions, okay, well, why not? And what can we do? What can we try to help them in new ways?
That's right. And in any sort of, whether it's a release program or just a breeding program, it's not going to be a win every time. You're going to do things wrong sometimes, but at least if you know what went wrong and you can learn from it and you can refine it, that's positive.
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah, people need to know what's going on and how their dollars are being spent and what the positive actions are. So
yeah.
Great. Ainsley, is there anything else you want to tell us about what's going on? Like, the timeline is to finish middle of next year?
I'm on track, pretty much. And we're at a really exciting stage of the results and seeing how it all unfolds. So thank you so much for having me on. It was a pleasure.
Well, tell people where they can follow your art career. Can people commission you? Can people commission you for a Helmeted Honeyeater?
Yeah, I do take commissions. I'm taking commissions at the moment up to Christmas. So if you're on social media, my main social media is Instagram, which is Ains Power. And I also have my website, which is AinsleyWalters.com. So I have prints available and original paintings. And paintings are also available at the Brunswick Street Gallery in Fitzroy.
Cool. Well, there you go. There's some good things to add to your shopping list. Some Ainsley Power Walters art, and maybe a Helmeted Honeyeater hat or a tote bag at the same time. And a mixed dozen of Indigenous seedlings from the Friends of the Helmeted Honeyeater Nursery. What more could you want?
Yeah, that's all. Coming up the printer, going home.
Well, best wishes with the rest of the fieldwork. I'm guessing you've still got you'll still be collecting a little bit more, as well as going through countless hours of footage?
Well, I think we're pretty much done with the fieldwork. I think maybe a little bit more, but we'll have to see. But yeah.
I look forward to the children's book about Harriet the Helmeted Honeyeater or something.
Yeah, we'll have to see. I think there might be a children's book already on the Helmeted Honeyeater website. So yeah.
But not one illustrated by you though, Ainsley.
Well, no, not yet. Maybe that will come up in the future. Who knows?
Yeah. Maybe Sarah Ferguson could write the story.
Sure.
All right. And, of course, I don't mean Sarah Ferguson, the hard-hitting journalist. I mean the Sarah Ferguson from Budgie the Helicopter or whatever it was called. What was her? Yeah. You know who I'm talking about? Or are you too young to even know who I'm taking the piss out of?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm afraid.
Sarah Ferguson, the red-headed former princess
Oh,
of York.
Betty. Yeah.
Oh, gee, I'm really showing my age today, people.
I do know. Yeah, she's got the two girls. Yeah, I know who you're talking about.
And world-renowned children's author from Budgie the Helicopter. You remember
Oh,
that?
really? I didn't know that.
Oh, no, that's how she managed to stay afloat, by writing children's books. Yeah.
There you go.
Oh, look, link in the description, folks. I'll have to put a link to Amazon or wherever she's flogging that book in the description.
I'll have to check it out.
No doubt. I can't believe you didn't have Budgie the hell. I'm pretty sure it was Budgie. Maybe.
What was that? Like, what year was it? Like 90s or something? 80s?
Hang on, folks. Hang on. Let me Budgie the helicopter. Budgie the Little Helicopter. It's even been made into a TV series. Oh, no, I've said it was, but it wasn't. It was, oh, no, yes, it was. Yes, it was. The TV series was written by Brian Truman, but here we go. Budgie the Little Helicopter, a British animated television series. The characters were based on the books by Sarah Ferguson, Duchess of York. Now, the original release of the TV series was in September 1996. January 1994 through to September 1996. So there we go. She must have written them in the early 90s, I'm guessing. So there we go. Well, you're probably forgiven for not knowing about that because you're not as old as me. But I'm sure that was there. The characters were Budgie, Mrs. Kitchen, Lionel the Aircraft, Ben Kitchen, and more. Well, there we go. Amazing.
We'll have to look that one up for sure.
Well, I hope you've learnt something, audience. Actually, here's the last chance. If you've got a question for Ainsley about helmeted honeyeaters or anything else, now's your chance before we wrap up. Let's count it down. Oh, I'm not seeing anyone jumping in. That means I've asked all the right questions, Ainsley. That's all that can mean. If no one's making any contribution, I've done my job adequately. So.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was lovely to chat about it, and we'll have to I'll keep you updated for sure.
I would like that. I will definitely like to keep people updated. I love the helmeted honeyeater. I was obsessed with it as a kid. So
got to start using my Twitter account. I actually, because I know that's how you came across my research. I just haven't really got into that Twitter world. I don't know. I find it a little bit. It's amazing. I find it a bit overwhelming sometimes. So I will have to start using it and posting more about my research on there for sure.
Well, if you don't want to, you can always send me something and I'll put it out there. And and keep checking out the hashtag First Seen and Heard on the Bird Emergency Instagram, and you can tell me what's going on Insta, and I can share it there. I think you're the Instagram giant. I think I'm a minnow on Instagram.
Oh, is I don't know if I am. I don't think so.
I think
I've been there for a little while though.
Cool. All right. Thanks, Ainsley. Thanks everyone for watching, and see you next time on the Bird Emergency. See you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Thanks, Grant. Bye.